Okay, we're back. Welcome back, viewers. This is Issues at Hand, WBS TV. And we are asking questions, and a lot of them come from really the business going on around us. Only recently, I've seen a number of messages, my friends sending in messages and asking, before you even discuss the Congo, the Sudan, can you tell us about the Rwenzori? Can you tell us about the Acholi? Someone says that the Acholi of Uganda got to a point where they asked for a Nile Republic. I had missed that. Someone says they asked for a Nile Republic, and that was effectively saying Uganda does not work for them. And then someone has told me that Honorable Hussein Chanjo got to a point where he said that Buganda should secede from Uganda, and this one is highlighting the fact that actually that means Uganda does not work for them. And Henry, that is sending these messages, is very Ugandan. He's one of my friends that I think are a lot of Ugandan. But he says he's only Ugandan when the Uganda Cranes is playing. Period. That a lot of the other times, there is nothing that he finds a meeting point about this superstructure called Uganda that fits him in. I have seen at functions and with members of parliament. I was recently at the swearing in of the Lord Mayor in Kampala. And all the other things taken and not taken, there are two things that stood out for me. When it came to singing the national anthem, where I sat behind General Muntu and several others. It's only General Muntu that saluted the national anthem. The rest of the people stood largely at ease, what my primary school would never have allowed. Everyone, if you sang the national anthem, had to stand at attention, had to sing along. It didn't happen at the KCA grounds.
Was it because they did not want, or because they...
Well, I don't know, but I'll give you this. Mm-hmm. Except for the front line had members of parliament, it had... you are, by Kampala standards, the A class of the political class of Uganda was practically paraded there. I've told you, except General Muntu, the rest stood, could have been actually playing away with their phones, texting away. The moment the national anthem went down, the next they sang Ekitiibwa Kya Buganda. And you will be amazed. The same people that had been texting away, some had been pocketing, and I was like, oh, really? Someone, member of parliament, is pocketing and the national anthem is singing? But that's it. The same people, the moment Ekitiibwa Kya Buganda started, all of them sang along, all of them were involved, and I was thinking, wait a minute, why? Is it about identity? Are they identifying with this? And I'm going to Henry's impression. I have been to football games, and when Uganda Cranes is there, everyone, it doesn't matter who, they are all Ugandan, and their Ugandanness ends as we walk out of Nambole. So what is it? Why doesn't it work for the rest of the Ugandans? What is it that the state Uganda hasn't done to fit in Henry and I, and people find in identifying as people of Toro, as people of Buganda, as people of the Acholi?
Well, in one of the areas where tribal group identities outcompete the state is in the aspect of belonging and security. And let me tell you about security. Security is a condition where the satisfaction of basic human needs is enduringly stable and also predictable. Within that frame of reference, basic human needs, stability, predictability, the tribe you are going to ask me what are the basic human needs. This is belonging, recognition, having fallback position when you are in need, and then you
The
are
social security.
Can I-
exactly.
Can I just intervene?
Yes.
A bit? I mean, you see, just excuse me and I take you back to the South Sudan issue. One is that we received this new state, this independent state of South Sudan, as a consequence of identity. These guys were lumped up with the Arab Sudan, and they said, we cannot
We
survive.
don't belong here.
Of course, I need to be clear that there are some other bracks that were left in the Sudan as it is, but largely that vote that led to giving birth of a new state called South Sudan, the bigger factor was identity. We are black Africans, most Christian. We want to have our own state. So when they had their own state, now it is identity that is destroying this new state. Now, after getting away or running away from the Arabs, now you start saying, we are Dinka, we are Nuer, we are Acholi, those Acholi in the Equatorial, and all those places. And even once that happens, even within the Dinka,
Oh, hold on there.
Because I think that's very interesting.
Isn't it because when they moved away from the larger Sudan
Yeah.
and came to South Sudan, they expected the state that is South Sudan
So here is
to
the
actually
problem.
deliver.
So here is a
for
problem.
both groups,
So here is a
and
problem.
they
I need to
it's
conclude.
delivering for only a part.
I need to conclude this point and say that actually the bigger problem in South Sudan is not essential identity. It is a leadership crisis, where you have leaders who are not keen and responsive to needs of their people. I'll give you one example. Because people essentially are interested in social services, you see, in living a good life. If leaders cannot even have their own children in schools in South Sudan, and those children are studying in Uganda, in Kenya, and all these other places, where is the vested interest of those leaders to actually establish a state with institutions, with services, where real people, can hedge? Do you see? And you have created, because the other issue is, I was asking, where are the people of South Sudan in all this? Do you know? Do you see? But most people in South Sudan essentially have nothing to lose, because there are no enterprises, they are not
If they
involved
have
in
invested, they've
businesses.
invested elsewhere.
No, I'm talking about real people, not people who are managing the state. Real people in villages, in Payams and all those places. Agriculture is not taking place. They are importing food from here, from Ethiopia, and all these places. So essentially, what you have in Sudan, before we go to identity and all these other aspects, it's a leadership crisis.
That is
Non-ideological leadership crisis.
that is a basic needs problem. Exactly what he's talking about. People being able to access social services, having this, and when the state fails to provide that. Now, in my understanding of the Great Lakes region, Peter,
And I want to believe you've been advising or misadvising a lot of our security in the region.
I've only been opening conversations. I'll give you one, and so that when we discuss the South Sudan problem, we put it into the broader context and say, what can we all do about that? In the Great Lakes region, we have not lived a day without war for the last 40 years. Do you agree?
Okay. I hadn't pictured.
Which is actually the same situation around the world.
Do you
It's
agree?
not exclusive.
I'm now focusing on the region.
If it's not in Uganda, it is in the Congo, it is in Burundi, it is in Rwanda. It
In a
is in
society that is so interconnected, I met a gentleman from an organization called New Hope for South Sudan. I met him in Kenya. And he was speaking so passionately about doing humanitarian work amongst the Nuer and how they are suffering. After 30 minutes conversation, I asked him, let me be personal. Are you a Nuer or a Dinka? And he said, no, I'm not. I'm actually an Acholi. We left Uganda, we went up there, okay? And we are hoping that as things continue to improve, we'll move back to Uganda. That is why I'm telling you that when you are discussing some of these things, you need to have a regional perspective. And when I say 40 years, one of the reasons I want to drive to you is that out of over 170 million people in the Great Lakes region, over 70 is below the age of 40. You have a generational problem that is not only in South Sudan, having all these militias organizing, but you also have youths in other countries who have internalized the paradigm, the thinking that when conditions are unfavorable, we fight. And there is evidence to prove that those who win the war fight, their conditions get better.
Okay.
So
I'm hoping that you're not using Uganda and Rwanda.
No. Even in South Sudan, I've
yes.
been in South Sudan, I've been there, and I've seen what is happening with, you know that in majority of the people in government, especially in the foreign services, were Dinkas. And why?
Because they fought.
And won, probably. So depending on who is speaking.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to drive
It's not
at,
about fighting, it is also about winning.
So what I'm trying to say is that how do we terminate that cycle, that mindset? How do we terminate that at a generational level? What do we need
By
to do?
making the state work for everyone.
Making the state work for everyone, but how do you make the state work? The state needs to create, this is why one of the discussions we had, is that we need to drive an agenda that drives the state towards constructing a more inclusive belonging, and make sure that we try and address transgenerational historical discourses that have been very divisive. Uganda took on, through the constitution, to say non-sectarian, no discrimination, and so on. But that has not found itself in the education system. It's still in there, you know. So when children are still taught,
has it not found itself in the education system?
In the curriculum.
Or in practice?
In the curriculum, even, of course, you would expect children to learn it. What Ukraine had done before this recent disruption, and one of my professors was heading that project, Karina Korestarina, was to rewrite Ukrainian history books, to teach Ukrainian history as Ukraine. Bringing it in Uganda perspective, you would not say the Baganda collaborated with, you know? You would say...
But it's a fact.
It's a fact. But now, what are those discourses taking us? Where are they taking the country? Where are they taking the country? If you are...
Yes,
if
as
you
Morrison
want,
comes in.
If you want to reframe...
You know, Prof, you and I discussed the choice, trauma, and the notion of that choice of the trauma, and particularly going back to it every day. If I am Muganda, every time I feel I'm pushed, I go back to 1966.
That is called a chosen trauma. It's
Yes.
The book is called Bloodlines. It's written by Vamik Volkan. It's an excellent book that actually talks about how people who have suffered previous calamities,
The Jews,
the Jews,
they go back to...
they tend to fall back into that
And it defines
to
them.
explain the current. If it wasn't,
The Tutsi will
we
go
should
back
have,
to it.
the Tutsi will have to go back.
The Ruenzori,
And one of the provisions he provides,
how do you terminate that?
education is one, recognition is
Are we
two.
short on those?
It depends on what the curriculum provides. Does our curriculum provide that?
Is
doesn't.
it education that is short, or is it practice?
Education is just one of them.
Because
You'd expect that when people are educated and oriented into a frame of thinking, they will take that one into
I'll
practice.
tell you the official. When I was growing up in Nachivugo Stadium, people would say the law has
Are you a
stopped...
footballer?
A football fan.
Okay.
The law has stopped us from calling people by their sectarian identities.
Yeah.
And they would say the law.
Just like in Rwanda now.
They would say the law. That would mean that innately the people were sectarian, but the law said something else. Now, if you move around and you know off this set, among the very quick things people will say is the law says you shouldn't be sectarian, but they will quickly count for you. And say, recently I think it is Honorable Semuju Nganda that was counting down and saying, in practice we are doing something different. Says, how many generals are these? How many heads of different... Actually, that report by, is it COSASE? The Committee of Parliament on Public Sector Organization. The whole report is on our tribal identities. And it's at Parliament.
It's very divisive too.
Yes, it is. But that says this is where we see ourselves at. So, Morrison, have we failed at practice?
Well, I think people cherry pick, really. Because once you take a certain angle of an argument, you always find, you know, a few things, you know, to pick here and there. Like the issue of the army generals has been clearly explained as contextual, as historical, and there are reasons. There are certain reasons why. For me, essentially, the kind of debate we should be having is, if people are joining public service, for instance, in this country, do we have a meritocratic system where a standard is set and whoever is competent take up these jobs, actually take up these jobs? But if somebody is mentioning that there is, you know, a dilemma in the fairness of the system, in how these exams are set, then that is a conversation I would want to have. Although I don't want to discredit the fact that in a country of 50, more than 50 nations, if you look at the tribes, I think, in the Constitution, when the NRM captured power, one of the first things they did was this broad-based agenda, you know, bringing in people up, getting appointed from different areas for purposes of this national cohesiveness, because the project of perfecting a nation, of perfecting a union, is essentially work in progress. And I want to agree with the professor that education, conscientization, you know, of the bigger goals, of the common purpose, of issues that bring us together, is the one that is going to decimate, is going to eliminate some of these, you know, identity inward-looking tendencies, because the bigger goal, the bigger vision of what we are looking at, is what is facilitating.
One second.
What is
I need to
facilitating
take
the
one
process?
of my callers.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I'm going to be the calling from London.
Yes, Kivilige, talk to us.
I must thank the gentleman in the studio for the wonderful analysis you are actually trying to make. But we have talked about tribes that are kind of trying to take away their state. But I was thinking that if people have their sense of belonging and is within their tribes, I was thinking it is not that. The leaders should have to cherish that, and they build on that, and they make up a state. You remember very well that Uganda or African countries, they have managed to make a military army based on people that are coming from their sides. In Uganda, it has been like so up to today. Even if it is not something you have talked about South Sudan. South Sudan, Yak Mashar also wants to have the same. And his president also wants to be having the same. So at the end of the day, if they bring those people together and unite them, they can make up a strong army which can defend their own country. So I think it is not bad that way.
Thank you. Kivilige is saying let's pick the best out of tribal nationalism, as it were, or whatever that comes with. Hello? Hello? Okay. This one says, Kivazo, while I agree with those gentlemen about the bigger picture that transcends the tribe, and our primordial identities. I would like you to think of our politics. Our politics is built around tribes, and I'm going to use Kenya, where I've lived a lot. The Gikuyu vote as Gikuyu, the Jaluo vote as Jaluo. So the country Kenya is only kept together by the interests of the political club. For as long as there is nothing to lose for the political club, for example in Uganda, there will be no peace. But if you made everyone a stakeholder across regions, then they will marshal all their people to the center and the state shall work. Chivuka.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes,
I
2
want-
minutes for each of us.
I just want to agree with especially the first caller, says that we should celebrate whatever is good in our identities and celebrate this diversity and build on this diversity to build strong nation states. But I also want to he gave the example of Kenya, but the example of Uganda actually, from how we voted since 2001 up to date, it actually shows a country that is increasingly less tribal. Because if you look at what the first candidate got, Yoweri Museveni, 60, the percent of the vote. You look at this, and he's from Western Uganda, he can be characterized as a Munyankole. The second one who got 37 or 37%, Kizza Besigye, is from Western Uganda. And the person who also came number 3, voted from across the country, across the region, is also from Western Uganda. Which that's a very important statistic that actually shows that this is a country.
It depends on how you look at it. It
I
may
am-
be actually a reverse statistics.
No.
That actually it is only a particular region that has offered leaders,
No.
and therefore the rest of the regions have been welled into a bottom.
Absolutely
But-
not, because if you look at the numbers of the candidates that were in this race, I mean, I think almost every region had somebody contesting for presidency. But because people don't vote from a tribal and a regional kind of alliances, perhaps like we see in Kenya and some other places, I think this country is increasingly detribalizing when it comes to national level politics.
Picking on his word, detribalize. You may have read the book Citizen and Subject by Mahmoud Mamdani.
I've seen it, I haven't read it.
He says, he makes an argument and says, to break the impasse on democratization in Africa, and he uses Uganda as one of the case studies, you need to de-ethnicize the state and detribalize the native communities. De-ethnicizing the state is easy. Exactly what he was talking about. Creating systems where people access opportunities on merit, resources are distributed well, that is excellent. Detribalizing
The native.
is difficult. Very difficult, and he doesn't say how in the book. Because at what moment do you say, this is where my Uganda stops or my Nyankole stops, and then...
Let me ask the last question,
So
gentlemen, as we go out.
detribalizing is difficult. What the first caller was
It's
talking
about
about...
the choices.
Gentlemen,
what
we
the
are
first
supposed to be
caller was
walking
talking
out
about
of here.
said, let's nurture the tribal influence, that influence, into the state so that it complements state building and nation building, as opposed to suppressing it. You can't.
A quick answer from
You
each
will
of
always
you.
lose.
Are we reversing to a point where the Czechs actually broke up Czechoslovakia and went back into Serbia, went into Slovakia, and went back into their identities? Are we moving in that direction in the Great Lakes region?
I mean, for me, what I think is that we are not. And
Sure.
if it ever happens, then it will be driven by elites with selfish interests. We looked at Brexit. And if you do the analysis very clearly, it was these
Brexit is tribal.
self-interested groups, mobilizing people around, around elements, emotive elements, which certainly is not a good thing to do.
The Scots have gone back and they are identifying by what you call the primordial them. Why not us?
No, the Scots are moving back to identify with the more satisfying identity of Europe because it brings more interests than what the small one brings. That is exactly what I'm talking about in the context of our countries, that you create this broader identity. That's why in America you'll have African American, English American, because the American identity brings incentives that encourage communities and groups to de-emphasize the small and emphasize the large one. It is only
Is that
when,
the direction we are
it is
moving,
only
or
when
are we moving
it
the
is
direction
only when
of the...
frustration kicks in that the African Americans are now saying Black Lives Matter, because the frustration is there. The state is failing.
Are we at the level of frustration in the
We
Great
are at
Lakes
a
region?
level where we need a difficult conversation about the state and the tribe.
We have to go.
And citizenship.
Thank you very much.